Ever had a guest who simply wouldn't leave? That's what medieval pottage was like, except in this case, the peasants were to stay. This endel, at its simplest, pottage was a thick stew made from whatever grain was most readily available, barley oats or rye. These grains formed a porridge-like base, which could be transformed into a rich multi-day meal by adding root vegetables, peas, onions, leeks, and, on the rare occasion, carrots or cabbage, if they were fortunate. Pottage wasn't just a meal, it was a means of survival, providing nourishment during times of scarcity. During the harshest winters, this pot could stay on the fire for extended periods, evolving into an endless supply of sustenance. For the medieval peasant, pottage became synonymous with sustenance and resilience, a dish that could see you through the darkest days. The role of meat in a peasant's. Pottage wasn't always lavish. Peasants didn't have access to the luxury of imported spices or exotic ingredients. Instead, they relied on locally grown herbs like garlic, parsley, and sage to flavor their meals. Occasionally, they would add small portions of salted pork or bacon, just enough to season the entire pot, but never enough to constitute a full meal. Despite its modest ingredients, pottage was remarkably fulfilling. Historians note that medieval peasants could consume up to 2 to 3 pints of pottage daily, providing them with the energy required to endure long hours of hard labor. Medieval bread, the foundation of caloric survival. Bread was another staple of the peasant diet, though it was nothing like the airy loaves we enjoy today. Medieval bread was dense, hard, and often dark in color. Made primarily from rye or barley, the bread often resembled a brick more than a loaf. During difficult times, it was not uncommon for bread to be mixed with peas, beans, or even tree bark to stretch the limited resources. This bread, while tough, was an essential source of calories. Some peasants could consume up to 3 pounds of bread a day, providing a substantial portion of their daily caloric intake. Despite its difficulty in consumption, bread was sacred to medieval peasants. Wasting bread was considered sinful, and stealing it could lead to severe punishment. It was an enduring symbol of survival, a fundamental food source that kept people alive even in the harshest of times. Gruel, the final lifeline. When pottage and bread were no longer enough, peasants turned to gruel, a thin, watery porridge made from whatever grains they had left. Gruel was the ultimate survival food offering, just enough sustenance to fill empty stomachs, but little more. Made by boiling oats or barley in water until it reached a thin, soupy consistency, gruel was often the last resort. Though barely edible, it was the difference between life and death during times of famine. Gruel was a stark reminder of the resilience required to survive, even when the food supplies were at their lowest. The unsung hero, turnips. During the winter months, turnips became an invaluable source of nutrition. These hardy root vegetables were easy to grow, requiring little care or attention. The entire plant was edible: roots, leaves, and flowers, and could be added to stews, soups, or of course pottage. The turnip's ability to store well in cool, dry conditions allowed it to remain a reliable food source throughout the harsh winter months. Though turnips may not have been a gourmet dish, they were the lifeblood of medieval survival, providing both nutrition and versatility. In many ways, the turnip was the unsung hero of the peasant diet, keeping people alive during the coldest months when fresh food was scarce. Cabbage and onions, the stinky duo that could. Cabbage and onions, despite their pungent odor, were another key element of the medieval diet. These vegetables were widely grown in poor soils and stored well through the winter months. Cabbage found its way into stews and soups, sometimes even fermented into sauerkraut, providing a way to preserve food for leaner times. Along with onions, these vegetables added flavor to otherwise bland meals, making them a staple in the peasant kitchen. However, cabbage and onions weren't just about taste, they were a source of vital nutrients. They turned otherwise plain meals into more filling and nutritious dishes. Their strong flavor and digestive effects were well known, but peasants understood that sometimes a bit of discomfort was worth the benefits they provided. Beans and peas, nutritional powerhouses. When meat was scarce, peasants turned to legumes like beans and peas for their protein. These humble plants were packed with nutrients and provided the necessary strength to endure long hours of physical labor. Beans and peas could be stored for extended periods, making them an invaluable crop during the winter months. Peasants often mashed beans into a thick paste, occasionally mixing in a little salt or wild herbs. These nutrient-dense meals gave peasants the sustenance they needed to carry on with their demanding work. Despite their simple appearance, beans and peas were essential components of the medieval peasant's diet, offering a reliable protein source when meat was unavailable. Waste not want, not the art of utilizing everything. Medieval peasants were masters of resourcefulness. Nothing went to waste. Every part of the animal, from organs to bones, was used to create nourishing meals. Pig heads, cow stomachs, and sheep lungs were all incorporated into various stews and pottages. These scraps, often seen as undesirable, became vital components of the peasant diet. In times of extreme scarcity, peasants would also forage for wild foods, such as greens, berries, nuts, and even acorns, which helped stretch their food supplies and provide essential nutrients. The Mediterranean influence, salted herring and cider. For coastal peasants, salted herring became an important protein source. Preserved through salting, herring could be stored for long periods and transported inland. Paired with bread, it became a quick and convenient meal for the working class, especially during religious fasts or times when other meats were unavailable. In addition to fish, cider, and mead were the alcoholic beverages of choice. These fermented drinks were not just for celebratory occasions, they played a practical role in food preservation. Cider, particularly in areas where apples were abundant, could be made cheaply and stored for months. It was a valuable drink that provided sustenance during leaner times. Honey and berries, sweet treats for the hardest lives. Honey was the most prized sweetener among peasants, valued far more than sugar, which was reserved for the wealthy. Wild berries gathered from the forests offered bursts of sweetness during certain times of the year, though they couldn't be preserved easily. Together, honey and berries were considered rare luxuries, offering brief moments of indulgence in an otherwise harsh existence. During times of extreme hardship, peasants made do with whatever they could find. Tree bark, acorns, and any scraps they could gather from nature became vital food sources. Their ingenuity allowed them to make the most of the limited resources available to them, ensuring their survival. Conclusion: a legacy of resilience and ingenuity. Medieval peasants didn't have the modern conveniences of today's kitchens. They didn't have access to the luxury of prepackaged meals or the abundance of food we take for granted. Instead, they survived through a combination of creativity, resourcefulness, and an intimate knowledge of the land. Their meals were simple, often bland, and frequently monotonous. But they were the difference between life and death during the hardest of time. In their world, pottage wasn't just a meal, it was a symbol of their ability to survive against the odds. The humble turnip, cabbage, and bread were far more than mere sustenance. They were testaments to the resilience and ingenuity that defined medieval peasant life. Their story offers timeless lessons in survival, community, and the art of making do with what you have. The next time you face a challenge in life, remember the medieval peasant's motto: make do with what you have and make it count.